This is the tiniest 4K pan-tilt zoom camera said to be able to replace your DSLR camera for a fraction of the price. I didn't believe it at first, but I think they may just be right. In this video, I'm going to share my review of this camera and how I was able to practically incorporate two of these into my workflow without having to spend $2,000 like on my Sony FX30. Stick to the end because I dare say it may be even better than the newly released DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Without a doubt, the Sony FX30 is my favorite camera purchase these past few years, as it has been able to do everything I needed to, like have long recordings for evangelistic meetings for church, video calls, as well as photography. But the problem that I have with this setup when covering for seminars for the church is that it largely depends on me. I work as a full-time nurse, and I don't always have the flexibility to have the free time to help out, nor have the confidence to lend out my gear to others when I'm not present. So, to take myself out of the equation and give the volunteer audiovisual team a system to help document everything, I was looking for an alternative solution. Then Obsbot reached out to me to provide such a solution, the Obsbot Tail Air. So I got 2 units to see if I could replace my Sony FX30s as well as myself for my church setups. They're not sponsoring this video and I'm not keeping these, but I will be donating these to my church. And if you know anything about recording video in churches, one of the biggest problems you'll find is that you have low lighting. Unlike mega churches, my local church has modest floodlights and chandeliers. So how does this thing hold up? Well, this guy has a 1/1.8 inch CMOS sensor behind a 23mm f1.8 lens. This helps keep the overall form factor small while being able to shoot in low light situations. Keyword, low light, not no light. This ain't night vision. We have an ISO range of 100 to 6400 to help expose our image a little better should we need to kick that ISO in. But for me, ISO 3200 is high enough for me before the image starts becoming too noisy. Here's how it looks in my church setup. Adequate lighting and placement is definitely key to making the most out of this setup. In my church's sanctuary, we have the floodlights. And in the basement, we have the ceiling lights, alongside pointing my Amaranth 60X with a 2X Fresnel to the ceiling to help to expose for where the speaker would be standing. In regards to placement of this camera, more on that later. We can shoot 1080 and 4K up to 30 frames per second, and for 1080 we can go up to 60 frames per second, which is plenty for anyone who is needing a pan tilt zoom camera. And if you decide to use this for action, you can shoot in 60 frames per second and then slow down the footage later in your video editing software. Just note that there is a bit of a crop when shooting in 48 frames per second or higher. I did end up playing with the tracking mode for sports in case you feel inspired to use this for outdoors as well. And for the most part, it tracked me very well as I was moving side to side and front to back on the tennis court. But if you're going to be far from the camera, I don't trust this camera to be able to track you at a certain distance. In regards to video format, we have the standard MJPEG and H.264 formats, but if you also want to save some more space on your computer, we also have the H.265 if your computer can handle it alright. I use an M1 MacBook Pro 14-inch and I have no issues. For church setups, I record in the highest setting, but generally for things like behind the scenes, I would just use 1080. If by any chance you want to use this for action sports, although I would not put it underwater, this thing may not have in-body image stabilization like in the camera itself, but rather it sits on a 2-axis gimbal, so you do have a level of stabilization should you decide to stick this on a tripod and just go around and maybe even vlog yourself. The camera is just so light that if you put it on a mini tripod that you could find anywhere on Amazon, that would be more than enough. I personally recommend the PGY Tech Mantis Pod because of its solid legs and ball head that locks off well. But a simple Manfrotto mini tripod will do just the job as well if you want to do streaming. If you want a taller tripod, consider buying a quick release plate that is compatible with one that you already own. Or perhaps you want to get a simple desk tripod and just thread this on there. For my church setup, I've been using a foldable light stand for a quicker and easier setup than a traditional tripod. Once you decide how you're going to go ahead and mount this camera, you can pretty much stick it anywhere in the room. But there is a catch. As a streaming camera for small setups like in bedrooms, this is going to be perfect if you just keep it in one spot. Stick it on a desktop and call it a day. But if you're in a big room and you want to get the best shots, you have to be a little creative. Yes, we have a 23mm lens in this camera with the ability to zoom in 4 times, but for me, this is not ideal because with digital zooming, the image quality degrades significantly to the point where it's what I call unusable. And depending on your internet connection or streaming situation in general, perhaps you may not even know the difference between your zoomed in footage and your wide angle footage. The wide angle footage is supposed to be much better. And the reason that you can't really tell the difference is because many people can't even stream the 4K that's capable in the camera. If you want to keep this in the back of the room for a wide shot, great. If you want to use it up close, in front of your subject, also great. But if you need a far zoom, you may want to look for a pan tilt zoom camera that has an optical zoom, like a traditional camcorder, to maintain that higher image quality. The ideal shot that I would like of the speaker is about chest height to head height from the back of the room. I want the viewer to be able to have a level shot with the speaker. But if I want that shot with this camera, I pretty much have to extend this camera pretty tall and in the way of the congregation, which would practically be in the middle of the room. That's distracting. So to solve this, I put the Obsbot Tail Air right in front of the microphone on the podium. I'm not in favor of this angle because it's just not what I'm used to, but it's way better than using a digital zoom from the farthest place in the room. For the time being, we still may use our camcorder in the back of the room with its optical zoom, until at least Obsbot decides to make a camera with optical zoom. Despite this, the connection solutions for this camera are different from traditional cameras that still make worth considering. But more on this in a little bit. Because of all things that's most important about this camera, it's the autofocus, and it's excellent. And this is mostly due to the fact that it is a wide angle lens and it's hard to miss your focus. If you're filming yourself, it's a big deal, especially on a camera that doesn't even have a flip screen, or any screen at that matter, to be able to see yourself unless you use your phone with the app. But even if you can't take the moment to open your phone and check your framing, this camera has AI built into it that helps with tracking you. One of the most iconic things about this camera is the AI features that recognize gestures. If you're a one-man band setting up your audio-visual setup, you can simply gesture to the camera to record and follow you, stop following you, and even zoom in. And even without a screen, you can clearly see the light on this camera so that you can see how it responds to your gestures. The blue light indicates that it's tracking you and responding to your gesture, and the green light is in stationary mode and notices that you're not using a gesture. If you're gonna shoot a lot of behind the scenes like I do, when it comes to doing things like a photo shoot, it would be able to just set this tool down, gesture to start following me, and then forget about it. Then when you need to make changes, or if you want to keep it in the same place, just use your gestures to stop recording, to possibly zoom in, zoom out, and you're good. The AI tracking not only supports tracking people, but also animals and objects as well. You just have to tap to focus when in the app. For people though, it performs well and you don't even have to go into the app. It really just sticks onto the person even when they're passing through objects, even just for a moment. Overall, when you pair this camera up with the light stand, the setup is great. The camera's overall form factor is like any other pan tilt zoom camera with a rotating and tilting mechanism on a circular base. There's minimal ports with a power button on the sides. Then at the bottom, we'll find a 1/4 inch hole for our tripod plates or even just a light stand. And for the most part, you're just gonna be using this with the app or would be using it with gestures. If you're thinking to carry this around, it's very light at 344.5 grams, as compared to many other mirrorless cameras that are twice the weight when you consider the lens. This camera is simple, and there's not too much to worry about when it comes to playing with the buttons because there aren't any except for the power button. Then there's a LED light that responds to your gestures. There's no interchangeable batteries for this camera, so if you need a longer battery life, a battery bank will be your friend to charge while in use. But if you're charging from zero, it takes about 90 minutes for this camera to charge all the way up to 100%, as they say on their website. So definitely keep this plugged in after use or in between use. Another thing to note is that we have a 3.5mm microphone port, a USB-C port, and micro HDMI port. It's unfortunate that although we have the microphone port, there is no cold shoe to attach a microphone or wireless receiver to. Otherwise, you'll need to use a tripod setup that already accommodates one, like the PGY Tech Mantis Pod, or buy a clamp that has a cold shoe and secure that to your tripod or light stand like I have for my church's setup. But even if you don't use an external microphone, that's fine. The camera does have an internal microphone as well, but I would consider it only as good for scratch audio and consider plugging any microphone of any kind here to maximize the setup. Good video is only enough when there is good audio, but many more times than not, bad audio will ruin a person's viewing experience. When it comes to connecting the video feed, we are left with the micro HDMI port, which is unfavorable for many filmmakers who have suffered from broken and brittle micro HDMI cords breaking in their cameras. So if you're going to use one, try to leave some slack in your cords and secure your cords accordingly. I'm using the micro HDMI to full HDMI from Ugreen, and it's been working great for me. Now, although you can easily use this for indoors and outdoors, do note that this camera is not rated for weather resistance. So if you find yourself in some kind of light drizzle, consider that a sign to pack up. But most of the time, you'll want to keep this camera indoors, and with the affordability of this camera, you could pick up 2 units and have a multi-cam setup for streaming. One camera can serve as a wide shot that you can stick in the back, while the other one could serve as a close-up shot of the sound or speaker. You can connect the cameras to Ethernet, HDMI towards a capture card, USB-C directly to your computer, and even Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. You can organize it with the NDI system, the RTSP system, and UVC as well, if that's something you're already doing. I'm not a pro when it comes to live streaming or even live multi-cam recording via OBS, so for me, I'm just using HDMI cords and transmitters to plug into my adapters for my Obsbot cameras, which then will feed into my laptop. But you can also connect with USB-C directly, so I love that. Then once I have connected my cameras to my computer, I can just select between the 2 angles on OBS. Before this Obsbot Tail Air, I will be using my Sony FX30 and my Sony a6700 with USB-C cords plugged into my computer. But again, if I want to take myself out of the equation, the Obsbot Tail Air takes care of the minimal setup, minimal operation, and all at a more affordable cost than the nearly $4,000 setup that I would bring in all the time. And one of the ways that's going to make it easier for anybody to control these cameras is through the app support, through a phone or computer. In the app, solo operators can use what they call the AI Director Grid. So inside the app, you're able to click on the icon here and have different angles to choose from as if you had multiple cameras for your multi-cam feed. So if you want your wide shot to be your close-up shot, then you could easily do that from your mobile device. And if you do want to take a little more control, they do sell a separate remote. One of the nicest remotes that I've ever used for a camera, most especially because of the joystick and the solid soft buttons. But also keep in mind, just like the app, you can also access the different presets as well. So for my presets, I would have it set to a wide shot, the close-up shot, and a following shot. Not only can you choose the different focal lengths and perspectives, but you can also choose the different positions that you want your camera to be facing. Like if you want to face the left side of the room, the right side, and of course, the center. But just keep in mind when you record things for a long time, especially in 4K, one would expect overheating. But I was able to record for a little more than 2 hours in 1080 and there was no overheating. Fortunately, I had the same results when filming in 4K. I haven't tested for anything longer than that, so just be aware of that when you have longer record times. When it comes to taking photos, there isn't any options to shoot in RAW, only JPEG. And in order for you to take photos, you would have to hit the record button first before the shutter button appears on your screen. This is similar to those of us who use iPhones and are practically taking stills while shooting video. Obsbot also makes ND filters, which you can use for photography for long exposures, and videography for maintaining your 180-degree rule, keeping your shutter speed as low as you need. Just keep in mind, the slowest shutter speed that we can use is 1/25th of a second. The photos are fine, but it would be nice to be able to shoot RAW. But I get it, it's a video first camera. Fortunately, for outdoor situations, we can shoot up to 1/8000th of a second to really capture a frame out of most things in motion. This is especially appreciated because there is no continuous shooting, only spam shooting, which is just us pressing the shutter button as fast as we can if you want to have an action shot. And that should be fast enough for most of us who just want to go ahead and freeze motion. What does it cost for all these features? Well, for the camera, the carrying case, and the USB-C cord is all in one for $499. And at this price range, we're already looking at cameras like the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 or a Sony ZV-1F. But if you're looking for the best streaming camera at this price point, without a doubt, it's the Obsbot Tail Air. If you plan on streaming a lot or even having long video recordings, this camera will hold up in battery life, as it allows for the best connectivity for your different computer setups, and especially if you're a solo operator. This is clearly the easiest way to go. Yes, you could save some money and invest in a mirrorless camera system as well as the lenses. But with these costs, you could easily have bought a second Obsbot Tail Air with all the accessories that I use for my setup. And those mirrorless cameras don't even offer the pan, tilt, zoom action, as well as the tracking features that are AI, by the way, that this camera has. I think it's safe to say that I'll be replacing my Sony FX30 as my church's mobile video camera. As a volunteer-based media team, this just makes much more sense as it's easy to set up with a smaller footprint and can be easily operated by a single person. And that person doesn't have to be me. I can just worry about taking photos instead. If you're looking for a more mobile vlogging setup, but in a smaller form factor, then consider this camera over here.